Yes, indeed. Welcome. If you check the time on the wall, it is indeed Biden time. So excited to be back with our very sporadic show, Biden time, as it were. As always, am Christian Bladt, and with me is the one and only Scott Moore. Hello, sir.
Hey, good morning. It's great to be here.
And I've received a text from our pal Tamra that she just needs another moment or two, so she'll be joining us soon. But also with us, legal analyst Royal Oakes. Royal, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us.
My pleasure, Christian. And I would say this, anybody clever enough to come up with a title like Biden time, you can do the show as often as you want,
Right. Time is fleeting, really. And so is Biden time. So, well, interestingly enough, I was thinking about it. And actually, when I put it on my calendar to remember, because I was thinking about what we were going to talk about, I actually typed out the old name of the show. I typed out Trump Report.
I still do it. I still put Trump Report. I think it's just ingrained, etched in my brain that every time I put it on there and I have to change it, I'm like, oh, wait a minute.
I mean, in this respect, as I was scheduling it last week, I'm like, well, it just in my head was Trump Report. Mm-hmm. And if we're going to invoke the name of the old show, we should always give a shout out to our most loyal audience member, Storage Yard resident. We do the show about once a month, but it's been 2 months, I think, this time. Mm-hmm. I think the last one we did was the State of the Union, and you always find us. And Storage Yard resident, I could not appreciate that more. Thank you for your interest, even though so much of what we say is kind of the opposite of what you think, but we always appreciate you being here. Royal, obviously, we always love having you on, but when there's big legal doings, that's when I send out the royal signal, the old bat signal. And so the only place to really start is the Trump indictment, which, oh boy, I was at the gym when he was showing up at the courthouse, and all the channels had cut to the same live feed, all so that they could have a second and a half of him getting out of a car, waving, and then going inside. And it was just like, wow, that was worth all that coverage that they gave to it. But let's talk about the actual indictment, the legality of it. We'll go into the politics of it thereafter, but just your understanding of it and what you think what you think of the DA's case against former President Trump.
Yeah, the case is pretty good. It's pretty strong in the sense that it's hard to believe Trump didn't know exactly what was going on in terms of the deal with Stormy Daniels. And to the extent one guy has already gone down hard, Michael Cohen has spent time in prison for participating in this, for sort of foisting this scheme on everybody. It's hard to believe that, if you want to be totally objective and if justice would prevail, well, why wouldn't Trump also be tarred by the same brush? But at the same time, as you've probably noticed in the last several days in newspapers and on TV, a bunch of legal commentators, not right-wingers necessarily, but across the board, have raised some questions about the indictment. And by that, I mean this. So as you know, it's got two big chunks. The first chunk is, okay, Trump violated a New York state law that says, thou shalt not falsify business records. Okay, that's reasonable. I mean, it's a misdemeanor. It's not a huge deal. But you got a company, you have business records. You can't just lie and make stuff up. It's a crime, sort of. But wait, there's more. There's a penal code section in New York that says if you do that with the intention of committing another crime, wow, now you're in felony territory and you're going to be in prison for 4 years. And that's what the DA is pushing. He is saying Donald Trump certainly participated in the falsification of records. But in addition to that, he violated some other laws. And now this is when it gets interesting. He didn't specify which laws Trump violated on top of the falsification. He refers to election laws, but also we have reason to believe he has in mind tax laws. And here's the problem. If the additional crime Trump committed was a federal crime, the DA is in doo-doo because state court DAs, these are state guys, not federal prosecutors, they're not really entitled to prosecute federal crimes. Now, he's going to try to say, well, there's a loophole, there's an exception, I sort of kind of can, but he's on thin ice. And so now you have to ask yourself, what is the additional crime? We don't know. The fact we don't know is a problem, because this guy, the DA, when he did his press conference and he had his 12-page plain English summary of the technical indictments of 34 documents, he tried to reach out to people and say, oh, we're the center of the universe in New York. Business is everything. And so it's really important to have business records. And then he said there are all sorts of laws that he violated. If he violated a federal election law, like, hey, if you're running for president and you give yourself 130 grand, you have to tell us about it. You have to report it. And Trump didn't report it because Trump didn't see the 130 grand payoff to Stormy as a campaign contribution. But if that's the law, then Trump kind of skates on this and he could be prosecuted in federal court. There's some other laws, some state tax laws and campaign laws that the DA can try to shoehorn in the case, but he probably, again, is on thin ice there. So bottom line of the indictment is, it certainly looks like Trump was involved in some nefarious stuff, but there may be some legal hurdles, and the DA may not be able to overcome them.
Well, I thought it was interesting that you mentioned that it could carry prison time of 4 years. So that explains to me what people mean when they yell 4 more years at any of his speeches and rallies. Joining us for hopefully more than 4 more years now is our pal Tamra Brown. Tamra, thank you for being with us today.
I have been in that waiting room for 4 years, Christian.
and finally, I was like, you know what? You're getting called up to the show. So we'll put you in coach. You're ready to play. So, yes. And, obviously, there's a lot of optics that go with this, and there was a lot of speculation heading in as to whether or not there was going to be a mugshot. And, of course, the first thought there is just the amount of merchandise Trump 2024 would have been able to sell with his mugshot on it. And he probably would have brought his own photographer to take the mugshot. But, and I think that the interesting thing about it, and we'll get more into some of the legality of it, is you do have to wonder about the politics behind it, the timing behind it. I mean, it's definitely something that's been brewing for a while. But Scott, what I wanted to ask you, is there something to be said for leaving well enough alone, or at the very least doing this in another 2 years? Because, I think that the Trump movement had sort of gotten to its, it's like strip mall and county fair part of the world tour. I think things had really kind of simmered down, and if there was ever a way to reinvigorate it, easy for me to say, this was it. What do you think about sort of the political ramifications of stirring up that giant Q-shaped hornet's nest?
Right. Well, I mean, because I would love to learn a little bit more too on the end of it with Royal about the federal part of it and how the DA would be able to actually say he could be prosecuted if he's state, but beyond that, I do have concerns about that too, right? Because you've known previously the previous DA and others have sort of let it go or kind of dropped it. And is this a strong enough case? And the other prong would be, would this happen to a regular, business person in New York if it wasn't Trump? Would they be going after this and trying to shoehorn these potential federal charges and have all these indictments if it was just a wealthy executive in New York? So that would be my other thing. Is there still a tinge of political parts to this, even though we're they're saying there aren't? That is my concern, because you think about it, would Bragg be going after an everyday citizen here for these same type of charges, or trying to shoehorn similar charges, taking out the whole election, the federal part of it? Would he still be trying to pursue a case like this with somebody if it, and that's where you can see how people could say it's politicized in that sense. I mean, I understand the root of it is a political thing, but when you're talking about it, would somebody actually try to take this case and charge somebody similar or someone on a lower level that was running for politics in the same way? So that's part of my concern too, and that gets people very excited. That gets his followers all frothed up, because again, it's like you either have the people that are going to say, hey, he needs to be indicted for whatever crimes he did, he needs to be charged for whatever crimes he did, But then you're going to have the other side that's going to say it's all political, it's a witch hunt, and they will never change their mind. And I don't think you're going to get anybody else that's really going to change their mind and jump from one side to the other, really, in a, you know, just a general sense. But I do wonder about that, and that is a concern. So it just gets his followers and his base really frothed up over something like you were saying, Christian. You know, people were sort of ready to move on, knowing that he has not really won at all for Republicans, and some of the people were ready to move on to DeSantis or start shopping around for other candidates, and now this has kind of brought them back home again a bit.
Could I ask a quick question, Christian?
Sure, go ahead. Yeah.
When you say frothed up, I want to know, as in a really delicious strawberry milkshake, or a rabid dog and his mouth?
Interestingly enough, it's a rabid dog that tips over a big bucket full of McDonald's strawberry milkshake. So it's a little bit of both. I think.
Well, you're the host, Christian.
Yeah, well, exactly, because
I would think orange cream more than strawberry, right?
Oh, good.
Oh,
Good.
yes.
Great
Oh,
point. Absolutely. It makes its own froth. Similar question for you, Tamra. Let's take the whether or not the DA in and of itself is politically motivated. We can take that out of this part of the conversation for a moment. We can talk about if you're, I don't know, the White House, if you're not the White House, but if you're part of the Democratic machine, do you make a call to DA Alvin Bragg and just say, yeah, this really isn't the time for this. Can we drag this out, file some extra motions, and not really, whip up this frothy frenzy right at the time that people are starting to dismiss this guy's presidential ambitions? Do you feel that there should be some concern about that, Tamra?
Absolutely. And I would think that they would have made that phone call. So I'm wondering if like analysts figured, well, actually, this may be in more of our benefit than into our. So I don't know, because I would assume that type of phone call would have been made. I don't know if you've mentioned this yet, but one thing that keeps coming up amongst the more politically geared accounts that I follow on TikTok is that people keep pointing out, like, oh, if people who support Trump, people who are Republicans will say, like, now we're going to go after Clinton for this, and we're going to go after Biden if you're going to turn this into this type of attack war like this. And we all keep saying, okay, do it. If there's some sort of, like, if there is a legal, if laws have been broken, nobody is above the law, then hold politicians accountable. And I think that that is the difference between the army that follows Trump versus the way politics used to be, and that these are just people that represent us, and not our our ideological icons. So
yeah, well, they say all politics are local, but all politicians are also hypocrites. So it's a little bit of both. I do want to get back to the idea of federal crimes being committed, Royal, as Scott had brought up. So, what do you think could happen if perhaps the DA has put their toe in the wrong pool of water, and they should have left this to some feds who, I don't know, could have already been building a case? I suppose the DOJ could have had something that they were working on. You'd feel like that would have been able to stop it in some way. But what are some of the worst case scenarios for the Manhattan DA? That worst case scenarios for the DA's office are basically the red meat for the people in our live chat right now.
Right. Well, first of all, I want to compliment you on choosing a more family-friendly metaphor, the wrong toe in the water, because I can think of 2 or 3 metaphors you could have used that maybe wouldn't have gone over as well.
Yes, well,
out of our mind.
Especially for anyone who has studied the Stormy Daniels film catalog. There's a lot of different ways we could have gone.
There's a nightmare scenario, and there's a way Bragg can escape. So here's the nightmare scenario, and it has 2 parts. First of all, if it is determined that when Bragg said, well, he not only falsified business records, but he committed another crime, or he intended to commit it, if it's a federal election crime that he intended to commit, Trump might be able to say to the judge, hey, Your Honor, hasta la vista, we're leaving for federal court, because you have a right to kick a case over to federal court if it's basically a federal law issue. At which point Bragg is no longer the hero. It's in federal court. And guess what? At the top of the federal court pyramid, a Supreme Court with 3 appointees by Trump. And although they voted against him a bunch of times in a bunch of ways in the last year or two, they just might save him on this one. The other aspect is the way that Bragg could be in trouble is the election law violation at the federal level is, oh, you gave 130 grand and you really knew it was a campaign contribution, but you didn't report it as such. You know, it's true. And yet a lot of people look at this and say, I guess it kind of was an election. It was a campaign contribution, but really wouldn't any guy on the planet spend the money to clam up somebody like Stormy Daniels? And that might make it hard for a jury to convict him on the federal law election violation. So now we go to the good news for Bragg. The weird part about this New York statute is that it says he is in felony territory if he intended to commit another crime. It doesn't say if he did commit another crime. So Bragg is going to get to say to this judge in response to the inevitable Trump motion to dismiss, oh, Your Honor, they're saying I'm trying to prove that there was a federal law violation. No, I'm only trying to prove that in Trump's mind, he intended to violate federal law. And that's different from me proving beyond reasonable doubt that he actually did it. So in that sense, you know, we don't know if Bragg's going to be okay or not. But the fact that he was kind of vague, and it's frustratingly vague because, you know, inquiring minds want to know. The whole world is wondering what are the specific charges, and we don't really know. And one columnist made a really good point, namely, if we are having trouble, you know, the law professors from Georgetown and so on, understanding really where the DA was coming from, what about the lay people on the grand jury who voted to indict Donald Trump? Did they have a clear picture in their mind of what it is that the DA is saying? Yeah, maybe not. And this, I don't want to veer too far to the politics, but as people have pointed out, in New York City, Biden had a pretty good day back in November 2020, 80% to 12% for Trump. And so people are asking, you know, can you really get a fair-minded jury? Maybe, you know, if you work overtime for 3 or 4 weeks and hook these guys up to a polygraph machine, you'll find out who the stealth jurors are. But it could be a challenge to get a fair jury in New York City.
Well, yeah, I mean, especially, I mean, there's, you know, even again, you take the politics out just for a split second, you know, his name's still on buildings in that city, you know, and, you know, it's like people have an impression of him pre 2015, you know, and doesn't really, I don't think that the time that followed necessarily changes that impression at all. So, Scott, what do you think, you know, best case scenario for, for Democrats, I suppose, is the only viable solution here that he is found guilty and spends 4 years in jail, which I actually don't think would happen. But do you feel like that's is that like, you know, on the letters throughout the Democratic establishment? Dear Easter Bunny, I only want one thing this Sunday, and that's Donald Trump in handcuffs. Do you think that that's really the only way that they're able to kind of get cleanly out of this and then go like, all right, well, I can't run for president at this point?
Well, I think, you know, this has been brought up a lot. Is this the first case is sort of the weakest or the most ambiguous, and also the one that's basically, like, to Royal's point, like, would anyone do that if they were down in that situation? Or one of the things that Trump's lawyers were saying too is that it was to protect his family and all this other stuff from the, you know, there's all these different directions you go in, but it is like the weakest sort of one, the least directly affected to what you could say is political, in the sense of the Georgia, you know, election, the classified documents, January 6th. I mean, there's so many other things that could potentially be more perilous for him that I do feel like it would be better for it to sort of go away, because, again, to Royal's point, and I was saying this too, is like, when those jurors heard that, do they even know what they were basically voting on, or, you know, basically agreeing to these indictments? And you're in a city that, to your point, has a an opinion of him, much like we do in the rest of the country at this point, that you're one way or another, that has been there since he was the business guy, way before politics. So I think it's very difficult, and it's not going to change anything, and it's not going to be a great, oh, we got him finally kind of thing for this particular case. I think this is sort of the weakest one. So if it went away, it would be better. But on the flip side to that, if it goes away, then it's just going to be another one that Trump can crow about, like getting out of again. And, you know, that can also energize him to a bit too, because then his, you know, base and followers can be like, oh, look, you know, he got out of this because of course it was just a witch hunt. And, you know, so it doesn't necessarily, it's not necessarily positive either way. I think further along, some of these other legitimate cases that are more directly affected to his job and what he did as president, and some of those other things are going to come up. I read an opinion piece today in the USA Today, which I feel is very different now, that basically said Biden should go ahead and what's the word? Now I'm totally blanking on it. A pardon. It's like totally blanking. That he should pardon Trump. And I thought that would be the worst case scenario in this case. I don't think, you know, where our politics are and everything, that if Biden was to just do a pardon for all of these, that's going to do anything for anybody that's going to make things better in any sense. But I do agree that at least if this part somehow found a way to just quietly go away, and then they could focus on the real cases that are going to come up over the next year or so, that would be something that's going to be a little bit more important to the country and to the future of our country with those cases. Yeah,
I mean, Gerald Ford pardoning Richard Nixon made 100% sense. It's like we just move on from it. But this, I that's crazy. That idea. That the motivate. You know, if in some world Mike Pence were president right now, I mean, maybe. You know,
I would think that it's a good idea because of the fact that the swing voters, the independent voters. So Biden wants to present himself as this person who listens to all sides, is reasonable, will reach across the aisle, and doing something like that would definitely be the ultimate way to do that. So I would think that would be a good move for the people that were swayed back towards Trump because of this whole trial.
Hey, Christian, can I make a quick comment about the possibility of a pardon? Because I saw that reported as well. I think that before we see Biden pardon Trump, we are going to see in Madison Square Garden, before a packed house on stage, Marjorie Taylor Greene performing a sex act on Bernie Sanders.
Yikes. Wow, that was very specific.
I'm just saying.
Yep.
Have you seen a listing on StubHub that I haven't, Royal? I didn't realize that.
No, but I hope to get a ticket, because then I can resell it for a really good profit.
I do understand where Tamra and obviously having not read the piece, but the gist of what I'm getting from it, I can understand that there's the idea of let's just move on forward. And yes, it does a lot to give Biden this notion of like, I'm not, this isn't what I'm about in trying to get reelected. But I'll also, I mean, if like Trump would somehow, there'd be a contingency where he'd have to, thank Biden publicly for the pardon, that might be worth it. It's like, look, it's the only way you're getting it. In fact, I want you, this is what I'll rent out Madison Square Garden for. You get on stage and you beg for the pardon, and then you'll get it. So, boy, it's with those unions, it's really expensive to rent out Madison Square Garden, but we've just booked 2 events there. Royal, before we move on from this, the reality of where this can go, and just from my understanding, a grand jury voting to indict is like, okay, I think there's something here. We want to hear more, right? This doesn't mean they see it and they go like, oh yeah, this guy's guilty. This is just more like, we're informed enough that we feel like there's a case here. Why don't you go make your case? Is that the correct understanding of what a grand jury does?
Yeah, there is, but then there's an asterisk you add to that.
Okay.
So when you decide to arrest somebody as a cop, it's probable cause. And probable cause means a reasonable person would suspect that a crime was committed. When you search a house, it's probable cause, same definition. And when a grand jury is asked to indict somebody, the same label. would a reasonable person think that Mr. Trump probably committed a crime? Now, as you know, the famous beyond a reasonable doubt standard is harder to do. That's the trial standard. And so you say, well, grand jury can indict a ham sandwich, and that's such a low bar. But the fact is, prosecutors are smart, competitive people. And although they can get an indictment and force a defendant to go to a criminal trial based just on the low probable cause bar, they hate to lose. And if the only evidence they have is enough to get them over the probable cause bar, they're going to lose. They're going to look bad. They're not going to become attorney general, governor, and president. So I really think Alvin Bragg feels he's got the goods. Yeah, he disagreed with Cyrus Vance, no Republican, his predecessor in the DA's office, who passed on this. But I think Alvin Bragg thinks he has the goods. So yeah, that's the standard. And at this point, we don't know really enough about the heart of Bragg's case to know whether there really is a beyond a reasonable doubt thing going, setting aside whether the jury would have an open mind or not. It's very difficult to get into Trump's mind, and that's what you have to do to convict him. You have to prove, A, he intended to falsify records and did do that. Maybe he didn't touch the general ledger, though. And B, he really intended to commit a federal crime. The key for the prosecution is you've got two good witnesses. Yeah, Michael Cohen has some baggage, is convicted of lying, but he's going to be able to look the jury in the eye and say, I lied to protect Donald Trump. We had a scheme going. And then David Pecker, who was CEO of the National Enquirer's parent company, he's going to say the same thing. He's going to say, yeah, I talked to Donald a lot. And this whole catch and kill scheme, it was to help the election. And he knew exactly what was going on. So those two witnesses, I think, can be strong for Bragg. Bragg probably figures he can kind of clean him up and make him very impressive for the jury.
Right. I think that there's obviously, the fact that, as you said at the beginning of this, Michael Cohen went to jail for being involved in this exact thing. There's, it's something useful to pass along there, I suppose. So the ultimate for Democrats, I guess, the ultimate thing that could actually happen, let's say it's a really strong case. He's found guilty. How long would that take? What would actually happen? I was joking about him going to jail. I feel like Donald Trump would never spend a day in jail.
Agree. Yeah, never.
Yeah, well, the timing, I have to correct one comment you made earlier. You said, a letter to the Easter Bunny, because Easter is right about now.
Right about
It's
now.
actually a letter to Santa Claus, because December is when the next hearing in the
That's
case
right.
is. And we were a little shocked that the judge put it off till December. What's going to happen in the next 8 months? Well, what's going to happen is a bunch of motions. And so it's going to be a very busy time sort of behind the scenes, but not in court. And then we know that the DA is saying, hey, let's get it on January trial next year. And Trump is saying, oh, no, we're going to need more time than that. And I'm thinking, okay, so Trump thinks it's better for him to continue to suck the oxygen out of the room. Nobody's talking about DeSantis or Pence or Nikki Haley. And so he wants a stormy trial in like March or April, or, well into the primary, on the brink of the nominating convention. And so then that raises the question of, what about the other indictments we've alluded to about January 6th insurrection and Georgia election theft and Mar-a-Lago documents? Probably you're going to be multiple indictments going. So it's going to be, he's going to be spinning the plates. Trump's going to be really busy with all this stuff at the same time running for president. But I think his strategy is, don't talk about Ron DeSantis.
Yeah,
I think they should push it back to 2025 after he's already been sworn in again, and then start the trial.
Yeah, see, I was going to say have the trial start on Super Tuesday, but there's something to be said for Tamra's scenario. And then just just to circle back, however long it takes, whatever happens, do you feel like he would, no matter what this case finds, that he would ever actually go to jail for this?
So the conventional wisdom is, if it's a white collar crime and if it's his first offense, and many tens of millions of people would say this is not his first offense, but technically it would be,
right.
Probably no jail time at all. But on Tamara's scenario, you're right. That's pretty intriguing, because there is no law against a guy being president from jail. If you have an insurrection or an espionage conviction, the Constitution and statutes say, sorry, you can't be president. But that's not Stormy, and that's not some of the other charges. So as idiotic as it sounds, I mean, he could be in jail. I meing, but the thing is, they'd have to have an oversized cell
White House
to wheel the
arrest.
Resolute desk in, and he's bunking in with the Secret Service because the law says if he could be in Sing Sing or Alcatraz. I guess those aren't really operational anymore, but he's
Sure.
he's got the guys in there with him. And my nightmare scenario is you've seen plenty of TV shows about prison riots, right? We've all seen that.
Sure.
What if the guys really get out of hand? There's a riot. They get their hands on the nuclear football because if he's president and in prison, he's got to have and then they blow up Red China just for fun.
Okay, I think
it sounds like you have a movie idea here.
I was going to say, it sounds like Royal just pitched John Wick 6. I think John Wick is going to have to get into prison and get
then
the
Keanu Reeves might need a walker.
Yeah, that's a great point. So there's a few other things I want to talk about. And as we move on to the next topic, I want to start with sort of the big question and work the way down. Sometimes you want to start small and build all the way up. Fundamental question, Royal. Can a Supreme Court justice be impeached?
Yes.
Okay. I didn't know. So, because if your answer is no, that really puts a lot of water on the next part of the conversation. And obviously this story about Clarence Thomas and his wife Ginny's name came up a lot as January 6th was investigated, and a lot of things associated with the 2020 election and calls for ballots to be found that may or may not have existed. So we've heard Ginny's name a lot. And I think that there was always this expectation like, oh, so they don't talk about anything, Ginny and Clarence Thomas. And look, some marriages do operate in that way. There's sometimes they're different wings of the house or different houses entirely or different cities. I don't even know where Melania is during all of this, just by example. So, Ivanka got lost too. She doesn't know where to go during this either. But so there's this notion of impropriety by Clarence Thomas. And, getting a big Republican donor, sending him on trips and all kinds of things like that, which this goes back to the hypocrisy of this. Because if, say, I don't know, George Soros or Jeff Bezos was giving trips and money to Sotomayor or Alito or whoever, the exact opposite of people, the same people who were like, Clarence Thomas, what do we even know about this? Who are quick to stand up to defend him. They would say the same thing. It's the Trump versus Bill Clinton thing. It's, some things are improper, but only if we don't agree with their politics. So this notion of what Clarence Thomas has been up to for apparently a long time, what do you think it means in terms of job security, I guess, is a way to put it? Royal.
I think he'll be fine because judges kind of live for the fancy trips and the conferences. Sure. Oh, you've been invited to give the keynote address and so on. And there's a difference between a rooting interest that Ginny has and the conservative billionaire has, and an interest that is pertaining to a particular case that you have a personal interest in, like you're a plaintiff or a defendant, or you're an investor or something. So Ginny's involvement probably is okay. I mean, it was raised some time ago and Clarence Thomas is still there. And now this new news about the Republican billionaire, unless this guy had a particular case where he's, nudging Clarence in the ribs and saying, oh, when you vote on my case next week, I hope you do the right thing. So he's probably, okay, they're tightening up the rules. So it's going to be harder for judges to go on the junkets. But I think probably Clarence Thomas is safe.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it seems like, there's smoke, but not in the way that there's necessarily fire. Tamra, as you hear about this, what do you think it says about the regulations that are in place that maybe, that aren't in place that really should be? And what do you think this should mean for Clarence Thomas's seat on the Supreme Court?
I think Clarence Thomas should step down immediately. I think he should do the brave thing. I think he should do I don't know. I don't know much about this, but
sure.
So it has to do with his wife participating in the insurrection.
No. So that's something that came up, for a while. Like her name has been swirling around that for a while, and then it's always like,
Right.
her husband's a Supreme Court justice. Should we be worried about this? And as Royal said, it doesn't know what's really there, but this idea that he's gotten so that Clarence Thomas, by being married to Ginny, gets to go on all these trips and gets lots of money spent on him. Gifts that are not outside of the law, as Royal is explaining. But again, the outrage against versus the defense of it is pretty much right down political party lines.
Well, it would be
People
really
on the
great
left
if-
who would love Joe Biden to appoint a new justice and tip the scales back the other way. Those are the ones that are calling, hashtag impeach Clarence Thomas.
It would be really great if, one of the many reforms that we need to put in place concerning the Supreme Court. One of the things that would be great then is if they, we had some sort of hard and fast check that they can't accept gifts of any kind. They can't accept things like that. I mean, that some type of enforcement of that type of thing to be put in place would be great. But it seems like, this is something that is the powers that be don't have a dog in this fight. So there doesn't seem like there would be any movement on it.
Right. It's like one of the things that we've consistently talked about, and we've had on many guests of different political opinions in the various iterations of this show. A lot of times people agree on term limits as a good idea, but the people that would need to approve term limits are people that would basically endanger their own job security. So people aren't going to make that, politicians aren't going to make reforms that have a negative impact on the careers of politicians, and Supreme Court justices aren't going to say,
In fact, what they argued, I think, if we could talk for a second about the Tennessee legislature just expelling the two, junior representatives, I think that just goes to show what the powers that be, when they believe somebody is culpable of wrongdoing, then they're more than happy to step in and do what is procedurally correct, as long as it's in their favor. I mean, the theme of this show is playing politics for using the law in your favor for your side of the aisle. And I mean, I think that's an extremely devastating thing that's happening right now that's not getting enough attention.
I'm glad you were able to finish your thought on what the theme of the show was, because we've been doing it for 7 years and I had no idea. Actually, really, sometimes I'm like, is it a comedy show? Or are we just having fun? Are we talking about important? But I think you're right. It's fun to shine a spotlight sometimes. And Scott, in terms of what we're talking about specifically with Clarence Thomas, there is probably a political side of you that's like, oh man, how great would that be if Biden got to put it? But in terms of what we're hearing, it seems like what Royal said, that it'll ultimately blow over one way or the other, right, Scott?
Yeah, 100% agree with Royal there. I mean, look, is it squishy? Are there conflicts? Could you say, it's definitely not clean, but again, it's not illegal, and it just is what it is in that point. And yes, there are a lot of reforms we could do. And you could say there's a lot of great opportunities to at least have some oversight, because the Supreme Court has no oversight right now, like other branches of the government. But to your point, Christian, it'd be very difficult to put those into place. And I've gone back and forth too on term limits. I mean, look, when they originally put this in motion, which was a brilliant idea, lifespans were a lot shorter back, at that time period. And now you can put somebody on who's in their 40s and can be on for 40, almost 50 years if you wanted, so it is different now, and there should be more turnover. But then at the same time, if you thought about term limits too, you could see that it could also ratchet up the political side of it, because now you have judges that are only in for a certain amount of time, and they know that they can really put down certain things, and they're going to be more aggressive potentially on the political side of things. Not that it hasn't become politicized already in recent years, but there are pros and cons to any of these things. And I do think that there should be changes, but there's not going to be at any time soon because of how divided our government is. We don't have, and we probably won't anytime soon, have a majority, a super majority over 60 votes and for either party for a very long time in the Senate. And you're not going to have, you're going to have a closely divided country when it comes to all of this stuff. So it's going to be very hard to make those moves. And like you said, Christian, no politicians really have any backbones anymore to stand out and really do. Very few do. There are a few, but there's less and less that are going to go out on a limb for their own
don't get
survival.
reelected.
Yeah, right.
Exactly.
There's very few of them that are like, you know what I want to vote for? Having to find a job in 2 years. You know, it's it's definitely something to think about. Yeah, you know, Royal, it's interesting to think about Clarence Thomas because I remember the Clarence Thomas confirmation hearings and all the comedy that came out of it, of course.
High-tech
And
lynching.
right. And then thinking about the fact that it was 30 years ago, you know, it was that long ago that he was the new guy on the Supreme Court. Yeah. So ultimately this, like, you know, just to put a button on it, Royal, it seems like this is the sort of thing that there would have to be a lot more than this for there to be any real trouble. And even if there were trouble, he wouldn't have to be pressured to resign or anything, right?
Yeah, I think that's the bottom line. This morning there was a headline. Didn't actually read the article, but the headline was Clarence Thomas says, "I was advised that it was okay to do this, that, and the other." And maybe what he's saying is going to turn out to be a crock, but who knows? I think it's going to be a long shot. But I think one reason everybody's focusing on him so much is that although it's the Roberts court, Chief Justice Roberts, you know, Roberts has moved a little left. He saved Obamacare twice. He not infrequently votes with the three liberals. So it's a 5-4, and he's with the 4. And one of the inside baseball things about the Supreme Court is that they all vote. And so then whoever is in the majority, let's say you got 5 folks or 6 folks in the majority, whoever is the senior justice, been there the longest in the majority, that justice gets to pick who writes the majority opinion. And Clarence Thomas, being kind of old now, as you say, he's been there 30 years. He's the senior guy in the conservative bloc. So it's kind of becoming the Clarence Thomas court because it's sort of a big deal when you get to decide who writes the majority opinion. So it's less Roberts, more Clarence Thomas. So he's always been a lightning rod, but maybe even more so now.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, Tamra, you brought up something that I did want to touch on. Obviously, the happenings in the Tennessee legislature. There were 3 elected officials who were supporting some protesters, and the 2 who were of African American descent were expelled, I guess is the best way to put it. But the white lady got to stay. I saw her being interviewed explaining that why was I left there? We all know why. And we talk a lot on this show about optics, and it's pretty bad optics. If you got rid of all 3 of them, you could have made your point. But what as something that clearly caught your interest, do you feel that this is just, again, it's smaller level politics, but it's kind of, just a smaller version of the same machine, right? As you see this, it's just like, if you have the power to get rid of people who disagree with you, people who share different opinions, it's a very dangerous road to go down. I'm going to ask, would you agree? But I'd be shocked if you're like, no, actually, I think it's a great idea.
I think what bothers me the most about it is the continued comparison. The lawmakers that were in favor of expelling them were saying that it was the same as the participants in January 6th. Them being present during this peaceful protest after another school shooting was on par with the people who rioted the Capitol and were responsible for violence and death. Those 2 things are completely different scenarios. And so to compare, to try to make that comparison every single time any peaceful protest is compared to January 6th, it's impossible. It's so infuriating whether somebody really believes that and can't see the difference of why that was wrong, why that was not just any other protest. The January 6th was not just any other protest. So So to use that as an excuse to get rid of young legislators who were really, gathering a strong following of Gen Z or active Gen Zers behind them. These first of all, this is not going to be the last of them. The Justins, they're going to, they're going to have. These are very intelligent, very, very involved in their communities and stuff like that. They're going to continue to have a political career, but to in this day and age to make that type of comparison to a violent insurrection versus a peaceful protest and use that as an excuse to get rid of two legislators that you felt were threatening to the majority of your Congress. It's just that I don't know. I think those are the types of things that, like, as time progresses, those rights will. I was going to say those rights will be wrong, but actually those will probably just shift in the other direction. But yeah, I don't know. I've lost my train of thought at this point.
But yeah, I think that it's sort of well stated that this idea of, anybody that's set up where you can just get rid of the people who dissent, even if they're in a small minority of, the opposing party or whatever, that we've seen some of that, with as election disagreements happened in 2020 and beyond. But Scott, what do you think about this? Just again, the incident itself, bad optics, but the precedent that it sets. What do you think? Is there anything that can be done, or these state legislatures just, it's kind of business as usual? They can, if they're lopsided one way or the other, and there are plenty that are lopsided in favor of Democrats, you just be like, I know how to shut them up. We're just going to get rid of them.
Yeah, it is a dangerous precedent because you're right. I mean, when they have that kind of power, they can do that. And this was another state, kind of like Wisconsin and some others, that did this extreme gerrymandering. In fact, in that Nashville area where they had a longtime Democrat, they split the vote up and helped to kind of minimize the Democratic power by splitting that area up. And then, they were able to get another Republican kind of in the Nashville area when they pulled in some of the suburbs. And it is kind of scary when you think about it, because it could be used on either side when you start thinking about, let's look at these arcane rules and what can we do. But on the flip side, in the longer term, it doesn't really change anything. I think, in fact, they could potentially be able to run again. I don't think it precludes them from running again, but it does preclude them from being removed for the same offense. So I think if they went back and they won again, they wouldn't be able to be removed for that same offense, I believe, because they've already been expelled once for that same thing in Tennessee. But either way, these are very Democratic friendly districts, even with the minority now set up rule for Democrats in Tennessee. Those two districts in particular are Democratic heavy. It's part of the Nashville airport and a couple other areas there in Nashville. So it would likely go back to Democrats, but I could see in other states where maybe there is a very strong majority. You could see this playing out in other states that have similar laws on the book, where they could possibly expel Democratic members in areas that are more moderate, and maybe there is a Republican that can swoop in and add to the numbers there. So you could see it potentially working in other areas that have these similar laws on the books in other states. So it is a slippery slope there of using these old laws to benefit a party in power and helping it. But I also, again, like you said, I think she stayed in by only one vote. So it's very interesting when you look at that as well too, because we obviously clearly see the optics and potentially why that she was able to hang on by one vote compared to the other two lawmakers. So it's not a good look for the Republican Party, but that's again what they are trying to do to keep power, because you see again when you go back to the election this week in Wisconsin, where even though it wasn't supposed to be politicized, we all knew who the Supreme Court were, candidates were in this race in Wisconsin, for instance, and they won, and she won by 11 points, the liberal candidate.
Right.
You can see where this is the way that the Republicans have decided to go in some areas where they are worried about losing power, is how can they hold on to it, and what means can they hold on to power if they can't win by ideas at this point, and they want to target an ever smaller base.
So to sort of wrap this up, Royal, I think we've gotten way past the point of, after hours, Republicans, Democrats, all sitting down for some cocktails and just slapping each other on the back and having laughs about the show they just put on in the Capitol, whether it's the DC, federal Capitol, or the local state Capitol in Tennessee or anywhere else. I think the friendly disagreements, they still exist, but they're not common like they were.
Right. I agree. I agree with everything that Tamara and Scott said. They made great points about the Tennessee thing. Although I will say, when Tamara was talking and mentioning, I think Gen Z or X, I had a panic attack because I'm a baby boomer and my kids are millennials. I haven't memorized the years for the XYZ. And so when somebody drops it, I oh my gosh, are these people from the 80s or the 2000s? So I got to go to Wikipedia and memorize it. But
under 26 is Gen Z.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So on the big picture, I think it's an issue of
Or
extremism.
26 and under is Gen Z.
Okay.
So that's why that's one of my pet peeves right now is anytime somebody calls a teenager or like a 21-year-old millennial, I'm like, millennials are now 40.
You're right. So here's the deal about extremism that comes to my mind when you hear about Tennessee. I think extremists on both sides they're so stupid. The right wingers get a little power, and all they have to do is stress, low taxes, individualism, you work hard and you succeed, and strong military. But they don't do that. They get rid of abortion rights, and they suspend people from legislatures for First Amendment stuff. I mean, they shoot themselves in the foot. Now let's go to the left. Progressives, the woke folks are really strong. Do they every year? Look, we're going to give everybody free health care. We don't want people to die in the streets. We're going to give free education, free this, free that. Let's make a more compassionate society. Do they stop there? No. They say, let's abolish prisons. And when we say abolish, we mean it. No prisons. This is a carceral state. No cops. We've got to defund the cops. And drag queen story hour everywhere. Why do people have to inject the culture war stuff that's really going to piss off the centrists when all they have to do is stick to the bread and butter? But when you're on the two extremes, I don't think you're capable of doing that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that in terms of the big topics you referenced, I mean, the way that Republicans have gone after abortion rights is like, do you know how easy it would be if you could put a pin in that for, a few more years? That would really be the time to have gone after it. Yep. And, there should be, these midterms were, we did a show about how, we were expecting that they were going to be pretty nasty for Democrats. And yes, Republicans got a slight majority in the House, eventually when Kevin McCarthy was voted for, I believe 67 times, but whatever it was, and it's just like, yeah, you shouldn't be in that situation. And it's like, look, in a lot of ways, Joe Biden shouldn't have a chance in 2024. But when it's going to be Joe Biden versus Ron DeSantis or versus Donald Trump, it's like, I don't like either of these guys, but there's a handful of things that, and Trump having been president already, there's a lot of baggage there. And, it's the overreach, it was, the decision by the Obama administration to go for healthcare at that moment. Obviously, in hindsight, I think some people are like, that would have been the time to codify, Roe v. Wade, something like that. But they went for that knowing it's like, this is the best chance we're going to have for it. Republicans could have waited a little bit. I mean, they have the Supreme Court that they want now. That wasn't about to change. They rushed it, especially on the state level. And I think that there are a lot of things that ought to be left up to states. But I guess we'll just have to see where it goes. We only have a couple minutes, and I wanted to just touch on something, which is we mentioned Ron DeSantis a couple of times, and this is just a very unpleasant to look at or listen to person, and I think that in a lot of ways people feel that what makes him more dangerous than Trump is the actual believer part of him, the religious angle that Trump just kind of pretends. His favorite book is the Bible, and which book? All of them. Both books in the Bible. You think there's just two? Yeah. The Old Testament and the Older Testament. But anyway, so it was just fun to read, and it's a little bit of an older story, but we haven't been on since we had it. That there obviously the big conservative talking point in Florida is Disney shouldn't be allowed to do what they want because of some of the characters that they put in their movies and on screen. So we're going to take away their autonomy. And then before this new panel gets put in place, they put in all this stuff that's like, well, as long as the youngest descendant of King Charles III is still alive, we can actually keep our power. And it wasn't done in secret. They were just like, yeah, we're going to just do this. And DeSantis is saying today, like, oh, there's more to come. And I don't know how closely you've looked at this, Royal, but because we have you with a sound legal mind, did Disney just manage with all their, trillions of dollars worth of legal teams and minds who can, sneak stuff into contracts like they've probably done for actors and directors and things? Did they just pull a fast one on the state of Florida that's like, yeah, you can take away our power, except of course you can't take away our power?
Disney just had smarter lawyers than DeSantis' lawyers.
Yeah.
Clauses in the contract, and they found the clause that won. But thinking about DeSantis, some real key numbers: 38% of Americans apparently don't think Biden should run again. Really bad news for the Democrats. 57% of Americans think if somebody's under indictment, he shouldn't be running for president. I think the Democrat playbook, putting my political science beanie on, because I was a poli-sci major at UCLA, I think their playbook is Trump's going to be the nominee. We want him to be there, but we want him to be limping to the finish line, because I think their worst fear is that Trump disappears and somebody like DeSantis goes up against Biden. And I'm not one of those who says Biden, is senile, but based on what we've seen, a year and a half from now, I don't think he's going to get any better. And I don't think the 38% is going to be any better for him. So I think that's probably a smart move for the Democrats to join with Trump in making sure he sucks all the oxygen out of the room.
Yeah, I mean, it's the problem when it comes to, and we've talked about this on the show a number of times, is like there's not the clear alternative to Biden. I mean, we all remember that 2008 was supposed to be Hillary's turn, but then there was someone else who was like, oh, actually, no, that's the guy that we want to run. Hillary, you'll have to wait for a little while. So yeah, I think it is just that simple. I think that they got outmaneuvered by Disney, and I think Roz JD, you make it very difficult to bring your comments up because there's always so many of them, but I am reading them and I know what you're saying about Disney, but I think that it's not even so much the issue of Disney as a company. They don't like the message of the media, so they're trying to interfere with, by the way, I mean, the corporation that I can't even imagine the quadrillions upon quadrillions of dollars that Disney has generated for what county is Orlando, Scott? Is that Osceola?
Well, Orange County, and then a little bit of Osceola where Disney is. Yeah. Stretches.
So, just the amount of money that company's brought in there. And it's like, yeah, you know what? Make sure that they pay their taxes. They do all the things they're supposed to, but it's like, let's do this within reason. And I understand where you're coming from. And the simple point that he's trying to make, it was the wrong bill to support, and it still is. He's saying that their employees didn't do their due diligence. They heard "Don't Say Gay" and then mobilized. And I know that there's a lot of the detractors to that bill immediately point out that the bill doesn't say "Don't Say Gay" in it. But I do believe that it is the inference from it. But we can talk about it another time for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, I was going to say, I mean, look, I disagree there, because I do think and you go back to Republicans saying corporations are people. And in the case where a corporation has a lot of employees in a particular state that could be affected by this, regardless of anything to do with politics here, I'm just talking on general, basis beyond this particular lightning rod law, that a corporation would then feel the need to be able to stand up for against that. And again, DeSantis is trying to take the playbook from the Trump world. And as I've said on Twitter to him too, it's a losing strategy for him. It's a losing strategy. And I've said this for years. Anyone that's trying to go that Trump route, it's not going to win. Even with the fact that you could say, oh, DeSantis is the smarter version of Trump. The fact of the matter is what they're doing in Florida. And again, they're going to try to do these similar things that you just saw in Tennessee. Like they were trying to outlaw the Democratic Party in Florida. If they go too far, he is going to lose the moderate Republicans and other people that he's going to need if Trump is out of the picture in a nationwide setting. And I don't know if he's going to be able to do that. We've talked about it. He won by a thin sliver in 2018. 2022 was unique. He was running against a former Republican governor who then became a Democrat who didn't energize a lot of Democrats. And you didn't see, they keep talking about, oh, this massive, re-election for him, which again, not taking that away, it was almost 20 points. It was a massive re-election for him, but there were other state issues in play there that wouldn't necessarily transfer to a nationwide type of scenario. So I don't think him trying to take that Trump playbook is going to do him any favors. And for him to have picked this fight with Disney, he lost. And again, why would you want to pick a fight with a multinational company that has billions of dollars and has the biggest employment center in the state for you? It was a foolish fight and he lost. So it's not a smart strategy for him. It might work for his base. But again, what we've talked about for years, you have to expand beyond that Trump base in order to win in a nationwide election. And Republicans have, without Trump alone, have not been able to win the national popular vote, except, once in 2004, since going back to George H.W. Bush. So you're talking 30 plus years that Republicans have not been able to win and cobble together a national vote. So going down this route is a losing strategy for them. So he could maybe be able to be the go-to person after Trump. But again, even against Biden, he's going to have a hard time, even with the 38% of people that are going to say, hey, we don't want to have Biden run again. If they're looking at that and Trump Jr., a lot of people are going to say, hey, we're going to go back with Biden as much as we don't think he should run again. But we're going to go with that because of the policies and other things that are going to be in place versus someone who's going to try to take that Trump playbook that, again, I'll say it again, is not a winning strategy for Republicans in the national level in the long term.
Well, Tamra, to bring it full circle for our conversation that we've had over the last hour and this idea of DeSantis taking on Disney, where would you put your money if they rented out Marlins Park in Miami, because it doesn't need to be Madison Square Garden, and Ron DeSantis got in the ring with Goofy from Disney? Who do you think the smart bet is? Obviously, Goofy's got the big shoes, so that's gonna be an advantage. And it does not necessarily. I'm thinking MMA style fighting. Do you think that DeSantis, is really trying to prevent looking beaten and battered by Disney, because that's the biggest feather in his cap if he can be the guy who took down Disney and not get outmaneuvered by really clever lawyers, Tamra?
Oh, I think his biggest feather in his cap is his ability to dismiss anything that he fails at. Trick his base into not noticing that Disney is fine and he can't touch them. And I think his ability to gloss over any type of any failings in his entire career. I think that's what he's very good at. He's is Goofy gonna kick his ass? Sure. Yeah. I think let's run Goofy for the Republican nominee.
So,
wait.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, let's put this in Madison Square Garden. So now we have 3 events that we can do.
We have another event. Yeah. Some would say we've already run Goofy, but we can always put him back out there. And, look, when it comes to Disney, if the general public has a problem with some of the social stances they take, sure, that is reflected at the box office, or wherever, if they do. Yeah. And, there was a recent movie that I took my kids to. I think it was called Strange World, and there was a lot of talk about how I think a teenage boy had a crush on another boy. That's not why people didn't go see that movie. It was okay, but I was sitting there with my kids, and I'm like, I mean, the garbage that I took my kids to see Clifford the Big Red Dog, and they were having trouble with that movie, but the popcorn was good, I guess. So yeah, I don't think that they're the problems that they're easy to point to, and for people to take a stand against Bud Light because of the trans activist that's on the can. I mean, you should have been taking a stance against Bud Light forever ago. I mean, have some self-respect, and if you're gonna drink, just drink a Budweiser, for God's sake. Anyway, we went a little bit over. I don't want to waste anybody's time. I don't want to keep anyone longer than necessary. Thanks to everyone in the chat. Like I said, JD, you make it so hard to wade through and try to drag you in, but I appreciate you being there. Storage Yard resident. You'll always have a piece of my heart. Tamra, if people want to keep in touch with you, apparently you're not on Twitter because I wasn't able to tag you this morning, and I was remembering.
I disabled my Twitter.
All TikTok all the time.
Instagram, and TikTok. Yep.
Okay, so not all TikTok all the time. Instagram and TikTok. And where can people find you on both of those?
At Hey Tamra.
And Scott, Mitch McConnell hasn't been, getting any lashings from you lately.
I know. I've got to get back to that.
Yeah, but where can people find you?
You can still find me on Twitter at sman80, so you can still find me there.
By the way, speaking of Disney, I saw that somebody went to Club 33 recently, so congratulations on that. I went years ago, but the rules have changed, and I have not been back. But it's
I went once too.
It's a great year. Well, now we got to ask, Royal, you ever been to Club 33 at Disneyland?
One time about 30 years ago, it was pretty special. So yeah, I guess they've got Walt Disney's frozen body there in the kitchen.
Yeah, you can go look at it. It's like how they used to have Lenin on display.
Yeah,
right.
When I was there, the chocolate fountain ran over it.
And Royal, I know when you've been on, you've talked about the show that you do with your son. And I know you've got some big news about that. So take your time and let people know about that and where they can find it.
Yeah, thanks very much. So I am on Twitter at Royal Oaks and Facebook. And recently I've gotten a little more active on Instagram. I find it fun to sort of purloin the videos. Yesterday I put up a video of Stormy Daniels, who's kind of provocative, that's gotten more views than my more intellectual posts on Instagram. But thanks for mentioning about the podcast. My son Connor, who is a millennial, and he's a lawyer also. We've been doing a podcast for a couple of years called Too Many Lawyers. And
I always remember that. Such a good name.
Yeah, thank you. And the exciting news is we're also going to have a nationally syndicated radio show called Too Many Lawyers. It's going to launch in the next couple of weeks. So watch for that. And as I told you, Christian, I think the thing that made the deal was when they saw the Bladt cast on my resume.
Absolutely.
That got us the syndicated deal. So thank you.
Yeah, they were like, we don't know. Wait a minute.
Yeah.
You've been on the Blackcast Network on multiple occasions. That is going to get your green light. Well, and so if people want to keep an eye out for that and keep an eye on you, what are your social media handle, as it were?
Yeah, as I say, at Royal Oaks on Twitter, and Facebook is just Royal Oaks, and Instagram, same deal, just the name. Oaks has an E, so that'll get you there.
And you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at ChristianDMZ. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel, Blackcast, BLADTCAST. In about 2 hours, me and some other nerds are going to talk about the Dungeons and Dragons movie that came out last weekend. So join us at noon Pacific, 3 Eastern. And we appreciate everybody who watched live and anybody who watches after the fact. Thank you. Please leave your comments. I'll do my best to get back. And we will do our best to be back sometime in the month of May. But please don't hold us to it. But thanks again for everyone, and we'll see you next time.